I feel like my whole life I needed to make sense of my trauma. I really did. I needed to make sense of my abuse. I would have killed someone. That's how angry I was at what had happened. I just thought I want fucking retribution. So now I've turned that into empathy. I now give back. As you know, I work on the streets. I do a lot of work with other people in the same space as I am. And that has been so healing for me because I actually get to speak to others. A lot of people are drinking or using drugs or that kind of thing to show them that the undercurrent to that is actually trauma. The actual opposite to addiction is connection.
If you've made a mistake, hold yourself to account. If you've left a young person to be abused, then take responsibility. Hand in your resignation. Go down to the police station. You've committed an offence. Go seek the help. Go do the programs. Everyone needs to be held to account. Child abuse is child abuse, no matter what level you are at authority. And stop abusing those with lived experience and sabotaging. Stop putting the blame onto them if you've done wrong.
Hello, welcome everybody to the Person B podcast. And today I've got Glen Fisher and the lovely Sarah with me, and we are going to talk everything systems abuse. I think what's really unique about Sarah and Glen is that they've both, when I say they've got quite unique stories, but they have so many similarities. And sadly, they're the things that we're still seeing play out today. So I'll pass you over to Glen. He'll give you a little bit of an intro with regards to himself, and then we'll head over to Sarah.
Yeah, well, most people know my story. I was raised in foster care and orphanages. So for the first 7 years of my life, I was removed by docs 22 times, placed into an orphanage at the age of 7 when my dad went to prison. My dad was a pedophile, and my mother went into psychiatric care. She slashed up and ended up doing a whole lot of time in Ryde Psychiatric Hospital. And from there, it just doesn't get any prettier. I end up in foster care where I get abused. I'm in boys' homes where I'm again abused. And then I land on the streets of King's Cross where I'm raised as a street kid. And again, I end up in a refuge run by very high-profile men who are an organised paedophile ring.
Yeah, absolutely terrible. Sarah, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm Sarah. Most people might know my story as Sally was abused from the age of 3 when authorities failed their duty of care. So I was essentially known to child protection and police as a baby. I had over 59 reports. I was known to multiple child protection officers. Some of them were repeat. Caseworkers were coming out sometimes 5-6 times. So repeat caseworkers that were very much aware of the child sexual abuse and a lot of the other child maltreatment that I suffered. And it took over 13 years. Kind of went into foster care, kind of got shipped around. There was a lot more abuse that had occurred. And then I was kind of, at the age of 18, left to fend for myself and ended up becoming a children's advocate and now going to study my law degree.
Awesome. So I really wanted to drill down, like both of you have mentioned just in that first couple of minutes, there were obviously a lot of removals. So let's talk ROSH reports. So for anybody that's new here or hasn't had anything to do with child protection, ROSH stands for risk of significant harm. And although it's risk of, a lot of the time there is actual harm. So Glen, how many ROSH reports are you aware of that occurred before you were removed?
So firstly, I was not familiar with that term. But I know there was 22 times I was removed before the age of 7. Mm-hmm. I know that I have a docs file like that. It's just it's endless, the amount of people who were speaking up and docs kept failing. Like there was a psychologist that literally wrote a report in 1972 when I was 6 years old that said, if he doesn't get removed from this family, he's in huge peril. Like my dad, as I said, is a predator and my mother was very violent, alcoholic, schizophrenic, all those things. But there was repeated reports, But as I know, I kept getting removed. They'd removed me for like 2 weeks. And like you read the docs files and it actually lists, black eyes, CS abuse, the fingers severed, all these different crimes. But for some reason, at the end of 2 weeks, I get put back into the same house. Like, I make it make sense.
So you're repeatedly put back into the same environment.
That's right, yeah, into worse situations at later dates. But yeah, for the first 7 years, just kept repeatedly getting put back into that violence and that abuse.
And so when you were going through that process of being put back, what sort of conversations were they having with your family at the time?
To be honest, I don't know. I don't know a lot of the interactions with the docs and the family dynamic, like we're always sent out of the room as they talk most of the time, so I really don't know. I know that they class my mother as very unwell.
Mm-hmm.
She was schizophrenic. She was a heroin addict. She was addicted. She was also an alcoholic, and as I said, had a propensity towards violence.
And I'm not sure how much of that age group that you remember between sort of that 5 to 7 time, but do you ever recall a time where you had said to them, "No, I don't want to go back"?
Yeah, multiple times. So I remember that I said to them, "I'm being hurt." I didn't use the words "I'm being sexually abused." I said, "They're hurting me." And I said, and I was scared to trust like docs, you know what I mean? But I did. And it's listed in my docs files. It says, they're hurting me. And I said, my mother's giving me pills to sleep at night. And that's written in my docs file. My mother says, he has ADHDs, or they call it something different. They're hyperactivity disorder. And, I need to calm him down. But those pills were what enabled me to get sexually abused.
God. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Sarah, I know your story in a sense in terms of reports is kind of similar to Glen's. Like, do you recall how many reports it took for you to be removed?
Over 56 to 59. They couldn't even keep count, with an additional from 13 to 18 with another 161 in their care and supervision.
Yeah.
Absolutely ridiculous. And here we are still how many years later, and that hasn't gotten any better.
And some of the reports were they were actually placing me with sexual assault predators that they were completely aware of, and literally covering it up and essentially saying, well, that's just, we don't have any more placements. We can't do nothing. We don't have the funding. You're going to have to learn to deal with it, kind of just shoving it under the rugs. And it still, to this day, is happening to other young people.
Can I just speak to that quickly? Is one of my frustrations in the system that's failed you and failed me is the duty of care here is to find out, not like it's one thing to take us out of a home, which is disturbing, and then to place us into another home. But the onus is on them is to know who the fuck's in that house.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? If they've got prior convictions, who comes and goes.
Yep.
But none of those things, there were no checks and balances back then. And as you point out, budgets and all those kind of things were an issue, So the system really needs to take stock and ownership instead of stop re-traumatizing people like Sarah and myself, because that's how I feel at the moment. I'm sure Sarah feels the same way, is that it's hard enough being let down by the system for the first 18, but then to continually fail us it's fucking hurtful.
Well, when you talk about probity checks and things like that, so once again, for anybody that's new to hear, probity checks, police checks, you're working with children's check, which I hate to say this and I'm probably going to get blasted for saying it out loud, they're actually not worth the piece of paper that they're written on, because they actually don't check anything at all. Or what they do is they person B people like myself who do report and actually speak up. So in terms of those probity checks, I'm aware right now of a matter that I have recently reported in the last week where a young person was subjected to somebody that's on the register, the sex offender register. There had been a previous AVO protecting another young person some 6 months before. It wasn't hard. It's all there on public information on the internet. I found it straight away. So, for DCJ, for an MCS, which is a manager for client services, so yeah, that's cool. They documented that this person was at that house every time that they went there for their monthly home visits. They allowed that person to transport the young person. They said, no, this person's actually helping the carers. The child makes a disclosure. No, you lied. Police came in. They said, no, we need the caseworker's phone. The MCS said no, locked the phone in the safe. And it got to the point that the crimes manager actually had to say, look, I'm actually going to have to execute a warrant on your office if you don't hand that over. So not only do we have breaches of 43B of the Crimes Act, which is failure to protect, you also got 316A, which is concealment, which from what you've just said, it happened to you. It was deal with it.
Yeah.
And was that an authorised carers that you were placed with that were abusers?
Authorised carers, people that were a step parent, that were in a trusting position, that were known to doing it with other women's children, and the other children that they had prior to being with my mother, and were pretty much, that's cool. And it's really sad, as talking about the Welcome Children's Check, is that it essentially is a piece of paper, because if you're known to them as a child of being in care, whether you're a victim of child abuse, they kind of see you as the perpetrator, and then the real perpetrators get these clearances and put children at risk, and then leave the victims to fend and fight for themselves. Essentially, the victim's seen as, the mental, the systemic failures, they're stigmatised practically for the rest of their life.
Absolutely. I remember that one of the first times I ever disclosed, I was 30, and I had a DCJ caseworker sitting across from me at my dining room table in my home. I will name the bloke. His name's Mikhail. I've named him 100 times before. And, he said to me, oh, well, it's often the abused that become the abuser.
Which is it's a misnomer.
It is.
It's actually, I think, 3% or 6% of victims of abuse that go on to reoffend. Which is insane. Can I just answer to the WCC? Because I have a fucking personal issue with it, as you know. Firstly, the way that the system should be set up, you shouldn't need a WCC, right? This stuff should all be already accessible. If a person has a history of that kind of stuff, every person should be able to obtain that, right? Secondly, what a WCC doesn't do is pick up to intent.
Yeah.
What someone's likely to do, because more often than not, the abuser is someone in the family home or someone close to the family or someone well known, right? It's these WCCs, to me, it's fucking. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, and that's my problem with the system as a whole. All of these things should be all interactory so that it's accessible to every one of them that works within it. So when they bring up that file, every person that works in the police, docs, whatever, has access to that stuff.
We see previously with the reportable conduct scheme, you used to have to report to the Ombudsman, New South Wales Ombudsman. Yeah. Now this is where I fell into soup with my situation. And I didn't know this until recently when the whole Person B debacle came out. Steve Kimman made a comment to the media and said that the Ombudsman had not sustained the finding that they made about me in 2015. Well, I was told that it wasn't reported. And so I should have never have gone through anything that I went through anyway. But the issue is that the transference of that information from the Ombo to the OCG did not happen properly. And if it had have, what worries me is I think, well, if that didn't all get transferred, how many predators do we have, roaming around? And notwithstanding when people, which this is from you, right? You've told me this, when people come from overseas, and we're not saying there's anything wrong there. However, we don't know people's history. When they've come from overseas, we just don't know that. And, for kids that are going into homes with people that, may not have lived here their whole life.
And with respect to other countries, it's not a race thing here. What this is about is that some of these third world countries don't have the same checks and balances as the Western world, which means that a person could enter from one country and come into another with a complete fucking history that we've no idea on what that is. And we're actually training people overseas now to work in daycare centres. Right? Yeah. And day centre centres are just blowing up at the moment.
Don't get me started.
Me either, mate. It's a personal frustration of mine. I know this is controversial, but it's how I feel. Men shouldn't be working with children under 5 from my perspective. 95% of people who abuse children are male, and that's just a fact.
And the hard part is on the flip, like you think to yourself, well, some children don't have fathers.
Yeah,
that's a good.
I get it.
Thing to
get it.
Yeah. But but when I was watching a girl, I think her name's Mia on TikTok, and she was saying the same thing. She's saying, when you look at the perpetrators, the majority of them are men, which is awful to say out loud. But I think I know you've done some advocacy work for young people. I've heard a lot of feedback, particularly from residential care settings, where they've got a lot of people that can't speak English. And for me, when you're working with children who are struggling to communicate, they might have autism, might be nonverbal. There might be factors that, don't seem that obvious. Like, what's the feedback that you're getting when you've done advocacy work for young people?
Pretty much just what you said. A lot of them are international students, and it's, quick work. They don't even have to have, I've met so many that didn't even have a work of children's check, let alone a police clearance, and they just had a friend and were hooked up with a job. Here's, some quick cash. There was no notice when they were leaving, and it was like, see you later. I definitely agree that majority perpetrators are male.
Yeah.
And the reason being is that, females are a lot more discreet about their sexual abuse. And often people that aren't abused because of that, there's a lot of evidence to say that they are men. So when you do report a female, there's a lot, less that they're going to believe it. It's often, seen as, well, females don't really do that. And they're both equally capable. Yes, the science does say that, men are more likely, but there's definitely female perpetrators out there. And I look at my mother, she was a perfect example, admitted it to police, child abuse authorities, to the sex crime, to child protection. And she was still allowed to care for not one, not three, but over 5+ children. And even after removals had occurred, gone on and had more children left in her care, still to this day, has had more kids and still in her care. As well, no one child abuser and sex offender. And it's one of those things, that they kind of just brush under the carpet. And, it's quite hurtful for other people that, go through these things that, they're kind of seen as, well, they're not telling the truth and, let down. And then they're just seen as, attention seeking for speaking up for other young people.
Can I just say to your point in relation to men being role models for young people, I fucking 100% agree. We need men to be role models. But when they're non-verbal, which is from 1 to 5, I think that's where we really need to draw the line. So from 5 above, I'm all for it, where a child can articulate or verbalise what's going on. But between 1 to 5 is very vulnerable and dangerous, and there's too many kids getting hurt. Yeah. So look, it's sad. There's fucking good men in there who are doing really good jobs, and I'm sorry to you guys, I really am. But my onus is mine's about the children and protecting kids, right? And one is too many. One is too many. And at the moment, we're getting hundreds of them. Yeah. We've got a whole sex crime squad here in Parramatta that takes up floors because of cybercrime itself. Yeah.
No. I think at the end of the day too, it comes down to supervision. In foster family situations, there's really no ability to really see what's going on in the residential care settings too. And but at the end of the day, these young people are running from these residential places. Like back in August, there was 1,196 young people in unlawful, as they say, placements, self-placed or no unknown whereabouts. Well, let's say, what are they running from? Because if like Kate Washington says, therapeutic wraparound supports, if it was that, I don't think that we'd be having so many young people run. Yeah. And like Glen, I think you can talk to your experience, talk about when I know a little bit of your story with your residential experience. I remember you saying, I'm not safe here. I don't want to go back there. I'm not safe.
In foster care, you mean? Yeah. Well, like I said, I was put into a back bedroom with 3 adult men. 2 had prior convictions. 1 was preying on me all the time. But from there, I land on the streets of King's Cross, and what people don't understand is when a child's been pre-groomed, and that's what it is, your whole childhood, you actually start to believe that your body's a commodity. You actually start to almost become accepting, this is my lot, this is how the world works. By the time I got to a refuge, which, as you know, is set up by a Prime Minister, a judge, a senior magistrate, had 5 pedophiles on board, a woman who's complicit in that, who was a part of that whole docs thing herself, and it's Annie Crow. And I've named her publicly in the Woodrow Commission, in every commission I can. And it's just laughable the way the system works. It really is.
And Sarah, what are your recollections around telling DCJ at the time, I'm not safe, I don't want to be here?
So from as young as 5, I had caseworkers telling me I was autistic, so I would often use dolls, and they would refer to it as the mental thing, because they were aware. If I told them, drew pictures within my age bracket, it was, confirmed. They would often, take me for these sexual assault kits and the testing. The perpetrators would actually sit there and say, we are actually sexually abusing, a 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, and they were often aware. They were literally sitting there writing in their own notes, we are aware that she's actually getting sexually abused in her home. Yeah. And we're confirming it and saying it's actually true, but we're actually leaving a person there. And growing up, I would often disclose it to teachers, to people that I grew up with, and I was often told, you're attention seeking, it's drama, it's lies, it's this and that. I probably had about 4 people that actually believed me, and stood by me through it. The rest of them were like, that's just, it doesn't happen like that. Child protection don't work like that, because they had no intervention with them. They had no awareness that, this stuff does happen. There are systems. There's some beautiful caseworkers and, managers that actually do help, but they're really, really rare. They don't really stay long in child protection. Yeah. Most of them, cover it up and push it under the carpet.
Something I want to say that's a parallel with your story and my story is that they, I knew that was going to happen. I'd lose my trail of thought. I'll come back to you. Oh, that's annoying.
That's right.
Behavioural issues. So what often happens is a child that's been through abuse does exhibit behavioural issues. It's fucking par for the course, right?
Yeah.
But what actually happens is docs uses those behavioural issues as a justification to not listen to the child. Yeah. Oh, he has autism or she has autism or they're ADHD or they're hyperactive, they're always naughty, they're always mischievous, always in trouble. So what they say must not be true. And that's a flaw right there. We've got to understand that the science of how that works.
Every behaviour is a form of communication. I remember when I was at work, the team used to come in, oh, this child's flipping tables, they're doing this, they're doing
Yeah.
that. And I remember there was one little, I'm not going to say whether it was a girl or a boy, but this child used to approach me all the time and, hello, my name is this, and don't you like my hair, and can I touch you? And it's not like me not to warm to a child straight away. And it was just a bit of and it took me a while, well, actually probably not too long, but I realised that it reminded me of myself when I was little. It was the whole fawning.
Yeah.
And, I used to say to the team, if it's safe to do so, I want you to put your Inspector Gadget hat on and I want you to sit and observe that child. I want you to do a running log and not write what you think you're seeing, write exactly word for word what you are seeing that child do. And I want you to do that multiple times. I want you to do an ABC, like behaviour sheet, which I hate that word, behaviour.
Yeah.
But then we're going to unpack and reflect on that, because often you get to the bottom of what that child was trying to see or trying to say. And at the end of the day, you've also got care-seeking behaviours too. Like, does it take too much to sit down with that child and be like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Because I know I've done it, quite a fair bit. And, it doesn't take too much to do that.
And they're time poor, right? Often one caseworker has like 20 cases to deal with. So, when they do come and see you, it's all about tokenism, just quick cross the T's, dot the I's and move to the next person. There's no and I think it's important that when a child is exhibiting behaviours, there's a reason.
Exactly.
Yeah, not always, but more times than not. And at the very least, investigate what that's about.
Exactly. You don't always have to make a Roche report, but documenting. And then when it gets to a point where you start to think, okay, well, there's a bit of a pattern here, what's going on? And just do the MRG anyway, the mandatory reporter guide. That will tell you whether you need to actually go through and do the report. Like, it doesn't hurt. It just takes your time to do that. And I think going off what you were saying too with the no one listening, like, I can recall being brought into my school's principal office. I was at McDonald College Performing Arts High School. I'd been groomed and was being assaulted by a man that was 32 years older than me. They brought me in and said, look, you're a Kellogg scholarship holder. This is embarrassing for the school. You need to end it or leave.
Oh, wow.
And I remember thinking at the time, I didn't know what was happening to me was wrong, because I'd known that person for a very, very long time. And teachers knew, one of the teachers was actually having a relationship with one of the students at that time. It was very well known. It was just nothing.
Shoot the messenger's easier than accountability.
Oh, totally. And I always remember at the time, it was such a dysfunctional time at that school. I have some great memories, but very dysfunctional. It doesn't teach you what's actually right and wrong in that sense. And yeah, I hold great anger towards those people that didn't listen and that didn't do anything.
Yeah.
How many times I've been told, oh, you wanted it. Why did you let him do that? It's unheard of that, why you would never say that to a child ever.
No.
Yeah. So I think if you had a moment in time where I don't know, there was a circuit breaker, if someone had have listened at a breaking point in your story, where do you think that would have been?
I can think of a few.
Yeah. The first one. Let's talk about the very first one.
The very first one, I actually was believed by my great-grandparents, and I had actually absconded and caught the train to Liverpool, walked all the way to their house, rocked up at about 7 o'clock. Police came, did a welfare check when I got to my nan and pops. They left me there because they had no reason. The very next day, Child Protection had come. There was 2 from Mount Druitt and 1 from Liverpool, and they had simply removed me from my nan and pop, and my grandmother who was alive, essentially removed me because he was English, and they used the way he speaks was too fluent English for them, that they felt that it was a bit of a communication breakdown, just because he didn't speak English and he was, English from England. It was kind of seen as, well, we don't really believe you, we can't really understand you, kind of, putting it back onto him. And he never abused me, nothing like that. And then they would document it that he was quite close, that those 3 were kind of, my 3 safe adults. And they would deliberately self-sabotage that relationship.
And so how old were you at that point?
When this direct incident, I think it was about 7 of recollection.
Oh, so you're still very young.
Yeah.
Imagine if your life at 7 had have then started then your great-grandparents, that could have been a very different outcome for you.
Oh, definitely.
So good old southwestern Sydney, they always say the people from southwestern Sydney DCJ tend to scoot to the top. So it's interesting that they, where were you living at that time?
My mother was in Mount Druitt at the time.
Okay. And where were your great-grandparents?
Liverpool.
Oh, okay. So that's why they got involved. Yeah. That's shocking. And so did you get to see them after that?
No, they actually had no communication with me for about 7 months, and then we would report to the helpline, that my mother was disengaged with any family. It was unclear about, her mental health, whether or not, how the child's safety was, whether there was food, nutrition. They were unaware of, is Sarah, seeing a counsellor like she's supposed to, reporting that this person who's supposed to be mother was allowing up to 15 perpetrators at a time. Quite concerned, and nothing. So for quite a significant time, there was that big relationship breakdown where people that were safe and actually caring and had, kind of clicked on were actually reporting that, hey, she's ran away, this is what's happened, now we have no communication, and they were just dismissing it.
It's ridiculous.
Yes.
It does make you wonder why, doesn't it, Glen?
Can I just say something to you? If no one's ever said it to you before, I'm sorry the system fails you, man. Because I'm sorry I'm going to get hurt here, but it is what it is. Like, I feel your story because it's very similar to mine. The same, a lot of parallels here, and the system completely fails. You know who I'm more angry at? I'm more angry at the people that knew and did nothing, or the people who are in positions of power that were able to do something that did nothing, than I am against my actual abusers. If my abusers, I can put them in a box, sick fucks. But the people that knew and do nothing, fucking cowards.
Yep.
Absolute cowards. They're more worried about covering their ass than protecting a child. And that mentality's just got to fucking change, man. Sorry for being so...
No, good.
Glen,
that's absolutely... that's why we're all here, because, it's just been something that I've been banging on about for the last, I don't know how long. And, this petition that we've got that I'm sure they absolutely hate my guts for, but at the end of the day, that's what this is about. Like, why... Like, every minister that I write to... And now when I write an email about a matter, I don't just write to the one person. I copy in the world, make sure that they all know that each other knows. And it's like, for every single person that I email, if you choose to sit there and do nothing about it, well, then I'm sorry, but you're an active participant.
Absolutely.
You are absolutely choosing to not do anything about it. And I don't care if you're a minister on the other side, you should be writing a representation over to Kate Washington and saying, hey, what is going on here?
Yeah.
What is going on?
And I'd just like to touch on that, if someone goes out and commits a crime, they go car, stealing, hijacking, break and enters or anything, and they have a person, there's always the offender, their co-offender, and accessories that, they either knew and they weren't involved at the crime, but they still knew, and they're accessories. It's exactly the same, for child protection. If you're aware, a child's telling you and it's evident, and then you're closing it, you are an accessory to a crime being committed. We need to start holding them to account, to having jail sentences, to losing their jobs and never being able to work with children again. Yeah. It essentially affects people. They go on to rates are very high of victims killing themselves. They end up in, jail, prisons. They end up in these places. Most of them don't actually want to. They're not taught how to budget. They either self-sabotage and, they get their Centrelink pay and they're always broke because they're not taught how to manage, or, they have an overactive nervous system where they've got to go because they're told, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to be successful. You're not allowed to go get an education and deliberately set up to fail.
Well, when you coercively controlled your whole life, we've got a matter at the moment. Young person, DCJ, are holding their property ransom, like they're not allowing them to have their clothing. It's ridiculous. They've got no access to an ATM card, money, Medicare card, ID. Like, we're talking a 16-year-old. Like, that's just not normal.
That's quite normal. I experienced that. Yeah, I experienced that at 16. It's not normal to the outside world.
The system, it's normal, right?
Yeah, but if you go and tell your friends at school, or, anyone else, they kind of look at you and go, well, did you do something? Did you misbehave? They kind of blame it back on you. And it's like, the system does abuse. The system abuses their own people.
Yep.
And it's really, really sad. And people need to start being held to account. Child abuse is child abuse, and we need to stop.
I hate that they had to make something mandatory reporting. I'm glad that everyone has to be a mandatory reporter, but your conscience should rule that was a thing anyway.
I think every single member of the public, every single community member should be a mandatory reporter.
Absolutely.
When it's children, I'm sorry. No,
absolutely.
If you see something in a shopping centre even, my husband walked into the school before and after school care the other day, and a parent slapped a child across the face, and it's like, okay, well, I'm sorry. That obligation should be on the after school care people, but also, the people that saw it, because it's a witness to that. Because then if it happens again, like, Glen, if you've got a message for the current minister, like, you know how much I email them about different things, what is the message to her? and the secretary for choosing, and let's go to the DepSec level 2 and the system reform, because they're all responsible. What is your message to them when they ignore those matters and punish the people that are reporting?
I think the first thing I would say is stop worrying about covering butts and be transparent in everything that you do. And I think secondly is remember there's real lives, real people at the back of all these stories of what you do. And, you know, they're re-traumatising. I just think that there needs to be a whole change up in the way the system's run. And I think the most important one is to get people with lived experience involved in these organisations so that you don't just you've got those who are trained in colleges and those who have lived this shit. You know, and I think that they would be actually good to be on boards to be able to consult and speak to, you know, not working in the field so much as in working with the people kind of thing, you know. Yep. So I think that they need to listen a little bit more.
Well, I think it's difficult to really put yourself into that situation if you've never really lived it. You know, it's very hard to fathom what a child feels like at that time because, I mean, a lot of people, I've had people say, well, what did you see in a guy that was 32 years older than you? It's like, well, looking back now, you know, when you're 8, when you meet them, you don't know that that's wrong. And particularly, I mean, I was brought up to do what people told you to do. You won't be liked if you don't do what you're told to do, things like that. So for me, it was like, okay, well, I'm an adult. Yeah, I mean, I grew up, I was born in the 80s. So an adult told me what to do and I did it.
I have hundreds of people who message me, as you know, and a lot of those people are people who work within the system, within schools, within prisons, within all of it, docks, all of those places. They reach out to me and they're like, thank you for sharing your story because it helps me to do my job better. You know, and I'm just one. I'm one. There's many Glen Fishers, there's many Sarahs, and that's the sad reality of it. You know, and there needs to be absolute accountability and fucking ownership, man. Absolutely. Like if you make a mistake, we all make them. You know, if it's not done through malice, you know, like if you know, sometimes mistakes can happen. Just say, you know what, here we've really fucked up, and I'm sorry. Yeah. And I mean, that would, I'm telling you, man, that would mean more to me than anything. If someone actually came out from docs and said, you know what, Glen, I've read your story and we really dropped the ball. Yep. And Glen, I'm fucking so sorry. But it's not. It's all got to be done bureaucratically.
It's conditional.
It's conditional.
It's all conditional. And I think, on that,
Just touching on that story, someone from DCJ, a big, you know, executive director by the name of Susan Mallard, it was kind of forced upon DCJ to say sorry. Yeah. They wanted no accountability. They wanted nothing to do with it. No one else from any other state government came out and apologised. She was the only one from DCJ because the Supreme Court had actually forced her to do it out of good gesture. So it wasn't actually from the bottom of their heart. It wasn't that they were sincere. It wasn't that they said, you know, we're so sorry. We're going to, you know, give you help. It was, we're very sorry. See you later. Yeah. Kind of a tick off the box for the court.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's really, really disrespectful. We've had royal commissions and everything. Actually genuinely mean it. Actually stand up. You're actually going to get a lot more respect from the public by saying, you know, I work for the department. I'm sorry. We failed kids. You know, we need to help. You know, we need to put, you know, budgeting programs, living skills, and actually have that stuff for them. People actually go without, you know, they're homeless and many end up, you know, deceased by young ages and don't get to live their life because they just, you know, think of themselves as unworthy. And being forced to is just appalling. Like if you've made a mistake, everyone makes mistakes. No one's going to get it perfect. You know, you're talking about a system who you're never going to get the caseworkers that you need for the number of children at risk. No. But you also do discriminate a lot of good workers. And speaking on what Glen said about the lived experience, you get caseworkers that, you know, do apply with lived experience and they get told, no, you know, you haven't dealt with X, Y, Z. So there's that stigma that when you are a victim and you're going into lived experience, that you're seen as a vulnerable, like you should be quiet, you shouldn't share, you know, you're attention seeking, you can't do the job. They use their own bias that you can't work in the community services sector. Many people, you know, spend their lifetime savings and fighting through legal processes and end up with, you know, they lose their houses, they end up homeless, they end up living, you know, in caravan parks or housing commission because they've got no money left because they're just fighting their whole life.
Can I offer an alternative to attention seeking? So as a victim myself, and I can only speak from my own feelings, I know that I felt powerless and voiceless as a child for so fucking long. I really did. I felt like no one's fucking hearing me. There's no one's fucking hearing Sarah. You know what I mean? It's like, I forgot where I was going to go with that, but I point to it. It's with the Royal Commissions. Yep. What ends up happening is they end up grabbing us and getting all this information off us and then suppressing it. What does that say to us as victims? That we're already, I mean, and I don't go down the rabbit hole. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but when you look at it at its entirety, you know what I mean? And that, like I'm saying, our behaviourals, I'm totally losing my plot here. Sorry.
Losing your plot.
Losing, because I'm trying to remember you asked me when was the first time that I recognised the docs, and I've been trying to remember that in my head.
Oh, the first moment that they really could have made a difference.
Yeah.
When do you think that would be?
Well, it's pretty obvious on mine. In 1972, my mother was put into psychiatric care. She got 100 stitches in this arm and 120 in that arm. She fucked herself up. After getting out of there, a psychiatrist wrote a report to docs about our family and said, this is a very disturbing home with extreme violence and these children need to be removed, or worse to that effect, right? And but we weren't, you know, and there's literally professionals, there's teachers, there's principals, there's neighbours, everybody is saying, hey, man, these kids are in danger, and nobody's acting. You know, it's frustrating.
It's unbelievable. It's just, and I think for the frustrating part for me is that I obviously know a little bit about both your stories and the fact that you're both sitting here and Glen hasn't been compensated at all. So 26 years ago, you know, Glen's been down the whole Royal Commission role. He's taken down multiple perpetrators and hasn't been given a single cent for the pain and suffering that you've been through. And like Sarah, you had a horrific story with compensation too.
Do you know the excuse they used for me initially? So I went to a lawyer, held it for years and years and years and years, then came back to me and said, no, bro, go for redress. And I'm like, what the fuck? My stories, I've been through 2 Royal Commissions, 4 trials. I've got 4 in jail. 2 others would have been in jail, but they died through the process.
Yeah.
It's fucking joke.
May I just comment that none of my perpetrators, all 15, plus my mother, have all admitted, all been found guilty. Person causing children harm, person causing child sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Even known to the police that, you know, the child sex abuse detectives, to the New South Wales Child Protection System, you know, to multiple courts. And they're still out walking the streets.
But you know why they said they wouldn't compensate me? They said that because I've been abused by so many people like yourself, that my PTSD couldn't be ascribed to one person. So therefore, like if you've been abused by one person and you go in and say, I was abused by one person, then that's maximum, 100%. Your PTSD can be ascribed 100% to that one abuser.
That is ridiculous.
But the more you've been abused, the less your claim's worth. That's a fucking fundamental
flaw. How about
flaw.
you make the abuse of the system?
Well, that's right. And the other one, so...
caused both of your people, you know.
Well, that was essentially... Sorry, but that was essentially my case, was that my perpetrators and the people that I was actually suing and taking on was the state government, because I was under the age of 18 when all of this had actually happened, that they were actually legally by law the liable, the negligent ones that were actually allowing it. They were on notice. They did actually nothing. They put no therapeutic interventions into place, nothing. Like I was actually over the age of 18 before I had actually reached out to a GP and actually sought my own counselling, you know, seen a psychiatrist, done all of that stuff. Otherwise, I was just left in, you know, mental wards. There was one time an officer had just thrown me in the back of a paddy wagon and said that, you know, if you're going to go kill yourself, you're going to go kill yourself. Nothing I can do. I can just leave you here and hope that it doesn't happen on my shift, and then off you go.
Yeah.
And I think it's safe to say that not all police have that stigma, but a vast majority do. But there's some wonderful police officers out there, and like they respond to people that are known to child protection. They'll make reports. And sadly, there's a lot of police officers that want to go out there and remove these kids that are actually in these situations. And until it's actually at a really extreme level, they're not allowed to, unless it reaches JERT. And then, you know, still JERT doesn't do a lot. And there's some wonderful police officers that, you know, wake up and go to work and, you know, the child abuse squad and everything. And they've still got very little power, even when child protection are failing. And they're going, well, you know, this is child abuse. You know, this is our job. Yep. But from the court of law, they're not actually allowed to remove them, even though they're police officers.
It's a joke.
Sex crime squad are incredible. I worked with police my whole life and I fucking hate them all. They just, they especially uniform police, and no disrespect to them. I'm talking about from the 80s and my era. Yeah. They just, sex crimes is the hardest crime to pursue in a court anyway, right? It's often a he said, she said scenario. But the sex crime squad are so, I mean, they actually rang me up and talked about footy. You know, just to get to build that rapport with me, you know, and I'll never forget that. because my idea of policing came from King's Cross. You know, I grew up on the streets of the Cross, and so to meet the sex crime squad, I was so fucking distrusting, man. But they knew that. You know, they were trained, trauma informed, and they were fucking amazing.
I actually went in there yesterday, and I won't say who said it, but someone said to me, "Oh, have you been in here before?" And I said, "Oh, look, I actually tend to try and avoid government buildings, to be honest." Slightly traumatizing. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many police that, I mean, boy, they've got a lot of work to do to become trauma informed and to actually have that sort of community response. I just
imagine doing the job where you have to sit down and watch videos or replays of abuse. It's not a job I could do. I wouldn't put my hand up for it. I just couldn't do it. You know, I mean, these police, I mean, you know, I just did an interview with Christian McPhee, who's a former sex crimes police officer. Yeah. It's the same thing, you know, they end up getting traumatized, you know, and they come out of it with PTSD. You know, it's I feel for our police that are working in this sector.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the general uniformed police officer, you know, when you go to the desk at your local police station and you might get it, you know, early 20-something-year-old, and they've got no idea. Well, I mean, it's the lack of communication skills, the lack of care, I suppose. Yeah. And I get that they're busy. Like, I mean, absolutely, you can understand that they're busy. And same with child protection. Like, I mean, and this is when you come down to, you know, people not listening. Like, I get hundreds of messages a day, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, email. They're from the lived experience part. Why do you think they're coming to me? Because they know that they understand. And I mean, I have caseworkers reaching out. I have CEOs from NGOs that are talking to me, but they are terrified for anyone to know that they're talking to me because they also don't want to lose their funding. And
traumatised people need to be heard. And that's where I was trying to get to before, that desperation to be, you know, you're voiceless and you just want so bad to be heard. But that can be misconstrued as attention seeking when it's not. You're saying, fuck, I've been silent for so long. Finally, you get the voice, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But let's, you know, talking about attention seeking, we do need to have people attention seeking to get the story that, you know, when there is a known abuser, the rates go up. We know that girls are at higher risk. We know that men, you know, are just, you know, as likely to be sexually abused.
1 in 3 girls, 1 in 5 boys. But I actually think the stats are higher on men. I just don't think men speak up as much as they probably should, and girls, to be fair.
Well, they actually do say that, you know, men are more likely to be sexually abused but less likely to speak up. Yeah. Whereas we know, you know, females are, especially when there's a step-parent and an abuser. No one, or, you know, as in my story, everyone knew that my stepfather was abusive. And everyone had multiple disclosures from people that I grew up with, you know, authorities, everyone. And everyone dismissed it. And we know that girls are more likely to tell someone that they trust. The most we know, you know, they say that there's 5 safe people. I had 4, 3 which were my, you know, grandparents, and had a couple of good girlfriends that I've grown up with since I was really, really young that have stayed with me through the process, through everything, you know, the abuse, you know, going and getting an education, the court system, or the addictions that I had to overcome, the mental health challenges that I had to overcome, to getting to where I am now that have supported me to even go to university and seek, you know, an education, something that I didn't feel worthy of, or I didn't feel worthy of having savings or, you know, having assets or, you know, being able to go on a holiday, stuff like that, that they kind of put in your head that you're not worthy of, that you spend years of therapy to overcome.
It's the shame, isn't it? It's sort of that inbuilt, you know, that they often talk about, you know, shame versus guilt, and guilt is, you know, I've done something wrong, whereas shame is, you know, I am, like, there's something wrong with me. And I feel that, you know, the lack of connection, the lack of attachment that a lot of these children have, the system have no concept of that. Like, they might do all this training and whatnot, but from what I've heard from caseworkers, they do their 16-week, I think it's around 16 weeks of CDP training, and then have caseworkers say, I've just come out and done this awesome training. And then you're actually told to do the complete opposite in the field.
Yeah.
You know, and I sort of, I don't understand if you are working in a child protection role, and particularly with the most vulnerable and often traumatised young people, if you don't understand child brain development, well, then please go away and find another job at Woolies, because if you don't understand certain responses from children, if you don't know how to communicate with them, well, then what are you doing there?
Yeah.
You know, it's not just a shift, and particularly in the residential care homes. I've seen videos where workers have put on videos of children, you know, really having a meltdown, trashing the homes and things like that. And it's like, why are we putting that online? Like, I mean, that child is in the most awful probably time of their life. Right? I mean, it's not the child. And the workers will say, oh, you know, it's such a hard job for us. You don't know what we go through. Absolutely, I acknowledge that. However, what led to that point, to that young person being in that moment? What did you do before?
Yeah.
You know, I think if you could sum up how your experience in care has impacted your life, like what are the main 5 things that you've really, you know, sort of suffered from as a result of being a child in care?
So low self-esteem has probably been my biggest one.
Yep.
And it's the biggest thing that I've had to work on between EMDR therapy, hypnosis, psychotherapy, engaging with, you know, financial programs, being able to say, you know, I'm worthy of having savings, or I'm worthy of being able to budget and, you know, have investments and stuff like that. So I've actually had to, you know, spend a lot of time and invested in a lot of books and had to really, you know, educate myself on that sort of stuff. So that was, you know, quite a big thing. I had to really, you know, accept that I had really low self-esteem that affected other parts of my life. Employment has been a big thing. So for the last 6 years, I haven't actually worked. In fact, I was actually deliberately targeted by the Department of Communities and Justice during multiple of my employments, simply because a lot of the abuse and the systemic failures. Yeah. So that's been a big thing. I live with depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. Quite hypervigilant, deal with a lot of shyness. So that's a big thing. And I do have an overactive nervous system. So my heart breaks for people that actually have one, and they're often wrongly diagnosed, you know, with ADHD or, you know, attention seeking when you have an overactive nervous system. And it's like your body gets so used to, you know, the chaos and dysfunction that you got to go, 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 go. You know, you've got to go, go, go constantly. Or, you know, you have people that, you know, they get their Centrelink pays and, you know, they earn more clothes or more food than the average person. They're seen as hoarding when it's, you know, an overactive, it's a survival skill. And I'm certainly no secret, you know, I've had that happen to me in the past. And that's been something that I've had to work on in my own therapy. Yeah. And it's a big thing for a lot of people. And there's that stigma that, you know, well, they've only been in care, or, you know, they're housed those person, or she's just attention seeking, you know, she just had an abusive stepfather, you know, she's obsessive, she's, you know, just this, just that, you know, it's just drama lies, just don't listen to them. You know, that victim seen as, you know, being an easier target from people, especially when their story's wrong. It's that, you know, they want to protect their own self-image and believe that they actually didn't actually do anything wrong. They, you know, truly want to work up the courage that they're innocent, protect their own ego in a way to kind of boost their own ego and intimidate the victim and humiliate the victim, which is, you know, a form of emotional abuse. And domestic violence is not just, you know, physical, kicking someone, hitting someone. It's words, you know, it's referring to people, you know, as, you know, rats or, you know, attention seeking. That's coercive control as well. You know, bullying someone, gaslighting them, telling them, you know, it's all made up. Especially when you're not there. You don't always know what happens behind closed doors. You're not always there during investigations or, you know, kits and stuff like that. Like after my case had actually come out and it was proven, I actually had people going, well, who's this child? Who's that child? Feeling arrogantly and selfishly entitled to know sensitive information after they had spent years, well, majority of my life, bullying me and abusing me, to then feel entitled to know, well, who's this? And I had people going, oh, so sorry what had happened to you as a little girl, but don't really know you that well, to protect their own issues.
Yeah, that's right.
To protect themselves because they felt guilt and shame that they had actually been aware and they deliberately self-sabotaged, you know, a relationship or a friendship with other people to the extent that one woman who was an alleged childcare worker who still works in that area deliberately self-sabotaged a friendship and told one particular friend and two other people, don't talk to her. She's attention-seeking. She's crazy. You know, she probably, you know, is obsessed, running around making, you know, multiple things, harassing us.
That's crazy.
When there was actually no evidence to protect her own ego because she didn't want to believe the reality.
Well, I think, Glen, on that not believing reality, you talked recently about your situation where I think getting your file would be, I just couldn't imagine how confronting that is. And there's chunks of yours that just don't appear to be correct, aren't there?
No, that's right. There's definitely some abnormalities. They've removed parts of my story completely.
It's a polite way of putting it.
Polite way, yeah.
Or they block them out on purpose. They actually literally go, we're going to block out the offender or the caseworker. If that means that, there's a good chance of holding them accountable, they would deliberately block them out in black and white.
They've whited out so many of my files. Can I answer to the question you asked her about the 5 things? Because I think there's a few others that I think she would have, I have, that she probably missed. Intimacy was one for me in my 20s. I didn't want to have sex with my partners. It became a chore to me, because I'd been through so much abuse. I didn't want anyone fucking touching me. I didn't want to touch anyone. And it was hard to be in a relationship with someone I really loved, who I wanted to be intimate with. But it always felt like a chore. And it wasn't until, much later that it started to subside, I guess. The other big one, which I'm sure you'll agree to, is trust. My ability to trust is still to this day very fucking sheltered, very guarded on who I trust. Self-esteem was definitely a huge one for me. I always wanted approval. My whole life it's like, look at me, approve. And it's not, it's because you get pushed down so fucking much by the system and the people who are abusing you that you only think your value is in your look or how you, the sex side of stuff. And you don't start to see your value in anything else. Like everyone I meet that's not, because I had the misfortune of looking like a pretty little girl as a boy anyway. And I was forever, I could get on a train and people are doing fucking gross shit. It just happened everywhere I went. It was like it was written on my fucking forehead, and it's like, and I think that these abusers know that in a child who's been through abuse, they must present a certain way, and I must have been presenting a certain way without even knowing.
I think touching on that, a lot of offenders, and I spent quite a lot of money about a year and a half ago on almost a 2-week long. It was quite a few $1,000s, this training, and it was in America, and I'd done it online. And they were talking about how these offenders actually, will call themselves as like the Parramatta, rapist gang. Like they were they actually connect and communicate in jail and out of jail.
Yeah.
They kind of, they're always together. And if, they kind of like the same, and I hate to say this, but they can groom the same child.
Yeah.
They kind of get off on it. If they don't, and, this particular offender, it doesn't get them off and, they move on to the next person, that kind of starts a little bit of, rival between them, because then they start going and fighting each other. And it's like, it's a whole other, in a way, a crime gang, in a way, pretty much, where they kind of see you, as targeting each other, and you've got to be on the same page, you've got to be on the same target, and they will often share them. So they will often talk about these, kids and have, such sensitive details that they will actually share them online on, chats, websites, even this new chat AL, like they go all around. Like they've got websites going around.
The thing is too, like when you look at how the system treats children, like, and I see it day in, day out in different matters, the coercive, controlling way in which they, I suppose, interact with the young people, they're actually grooming them to be used to that type of behaviour. Like, there's so many young people that I've seen in situations that I think, no, like this young person is going to 100% find themselves in a DV relationship because that feels comfortable to them because they're not used to anything else.
I'm comfortable in chaos.
Yeah.
I'm very uncomfortable in calm.
Yeah.
And I'm getting better at learning calm.
Yeah.
But in chaos, I make sense of that. It's like I'm used to chaos. So I know, it makes sense to me. It's amazing, like you, depression, PTSD. I as a kid, kids used to walk up to me at school and do that because I used to jump all the time. I was always jumping, and even now, the fucking nightmares, all the different things that run parallel. I spent 10 years sitting on a lounge in deep depression. It was like every morning I'd get up and I'd press play. And it was like my whole life would replay in my head. And I was guilty in going down the rabbit hole with it. Like I didn't have the tools to cope with what was happening. I've learned much better.
You see, I always feel very calm around Glen, like, 'cause you're very chill and very, and like we fist pump.
Yeah. I'm like a duck in water, right? Underneath my legs are going fucking off. And I'm at the top one.
But like, what do you do then in your life now? Because, obviously you're both here, like you're both incredible people. Like what, and you're both bloody survivors. Like that's what you are. And I'm sorry, but if I wanted anyone working in the child protection system, it would be you two. Yeah. What do you do now to help you through, I suppose, the challenges of the things that you just talked about.
So there's a few things. I mean, I train every day, 3 hours a day, sometimes 2 hours a day, whatever it is. I box, I do weight, so I do anything that's physical that gets that endorphins and stuff going in my body.
Yeah.
But for me, it's about giving back. I feel like my whole life I needed to make sense of my trauma. I really did. I needed to make sense of my abuse because I would have killed someone. That's how angry I was at what had happened. I just thought I want fucking retribution. So now I've turned that into empathy. And
the abuse and the trauma, you don't own it.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I now give back. As you know, I work on the streets. I do a lot of work with other people in the same space as I am. And that has been so healing for me because I actually get to speak to others and show them that, a lot of people are drinking or using drugs or that kind of thing, to show them that the undercurrent to that is actually trauma. The actual opposite to addiction is connection. And to be able to teach people through my lived experience of growing up on the streets and the institutions through this abuse, it's taught me gratitude. I used to walk down the street and I used to think, why don't I have a fucking mum and a dad? Well, I used to see people walking down the street holding hands and I'd fuck those pricks. That's honestly how I felt in my heart. I had such anger because I wanted that. I used to watch the Brady Bunch and say, that's not how fucking life is. That's not life.
Yeah.
And now I've realised, no, I'm alive. I'm healthy. I've got 5 amazing kids and grandkids, I've fucking got a lot going for me. But we don't see that because we're so blinded by our hurt and our pain that we're almost oblivious to that stuff,
And I think speaking for myself, I tend to try and, I struggle to experience joy, to be honest. I really do. And I think part of that is I'm scared to experience joy because it's not going to be long before someone comes and takes it away. You can't, and even I love my children dearly. They are the most incredible thing that's ever happened to me in my life. Same with my now husband. Scott's amazing.
Yeah.
But, with my kids, sure, I can cuddle and be affectionate and things like that. With Scott, the poor man, he has to ask me, is it okay if I can give you a hug kind of thing, which is, very respectful of him. And but that's very unfair to him too. They're like unspoken rules.
I'm sorry, I've got all these Scott jokes running through my head.
Tell me the one you said in the car.
Oh, no, it's got nothing to do with me.
No, you said something. Scott. Oh my gosh, I'm so slow today. I'm looking forward to this, but Scott jokes, that's a whole probably podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, Sarah, you've talked about EMDR therapy. So is that one of the things that you have sort of embarked on or relied upon?
So it was actually a little bit of a DCJ recommendation from that mental thing
something good
that I do to them, where I can hear and observe, but I understand what they're saying, but it tends to take me a little bit longer. In fact, I've even gone out and done a lot of training for them, miraculously, and I've sat on their UWC Change Committee and their Futures Matter. I've got awards and even paid for it, and I was still seen as, you're doing that mental thing. And and so it took a little bit of time, but I found a really amazing clinician, and she was quite amazing. Happy to share out her name if anyone is interested. Get in touch. Yeah. And so we've done quite a lot of that with hypnosis. We've had to really dig into that, self-esteem. Like both of you touched on, is that chaos, and that's something that I'm really having to, work on. I even had an addiction to energy drinks because I was so used to them. And so I seen it as, I was drinking up to 8 of them. So I actually had to withdraw off caffeine. And that was a big thing. Like we had to work on, that chaos and that intimacy, wanting to feel heard. And it was like doing it in all the wrong ways. And I ended up in a DV relationship where I stayed probably over 1.5 years longer when I should have ended it. A lot of that had to do with, my own childhood, being scared, tempted to leave, about 5-6 times, and was unable to. Quite let down by the system with leaving. There was a lot of abuse from outsiders, people that were essentially growing up bullying me, that were continuing to bully me. So I kind of gone, well, that's just normal. I just have to deal with it. So I've had to work on a lot of that self-esteem. And a lot of that, going to university was a big thing.
Yeah. My
first day, I sat in the bathroom crying, saying to my friends, and my counsellor seen me that day. And I was like, I can't do it. And so we had to implement little strategies, step by step. Yep. And I had to actually get rid of a lot of friends that I thought were friends, essentially because of it, because, I had to deal with that self-esteem, relationships. You want to be loved, that you project yourself a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And essentially, I did, I would often buy more clothes than I actually needed. So I had to, go to therapy again. It was that chaos of, I'm going to miss out on not having enough clothing and stuff like that didn't happen, that I had to actually go to therapy and unpack, the bottom cause of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And, I went on to, save and, do a lot of travel, but it certainly didn't come at an easy cost. It was a lot of therapy. And I definitely recommend EMDR, and I'm still continuing it on. And it's probably going to be lifelong that I'm going to be needing EMDR and psychotherapy at a weekly to fortnightly. When we think about over 10 years of sexual abuse.
Long time.
I've even had people who bullied me telling me, have you lost the plot? Have you lost the memory? And most of them were going home, being abused, going to broken homes, abusive, avoidant parents who were, often self-medicating them with their children with drugs and substances and not actually taking them to go get treatment. So a lot of them were not actually bullying me because they wanted to. They too wanted to feel heard and loved. And it's just that I was an easier target to bully growing up. And, it's that kind of...
On the medication front too, like, if you have a traumatized child, like which I've noticed the system are doing now, and I don't know if this happened to either of you, but they tend to put all these children on stimulant medication.
Oh, mate.
And risperidone, like antipsychotics. And our pediatrician always says, I'm sorry, but I want 6 months worth of allied health before I even consider that.
Beautiful.
I want 6 months of OT, speech, psychology, whatever those specific recommendations are. Special type like PTCI, I've forgotten now. But special playtime therapy, to work on the attention, the connection. Like that's not happening. Like what therapy did you receive, or did either of you receive in the system?
And I think it's important to acknowledge that none of these workers are actually mental health clinicians or, clinical, or they work in child protection and, they have a master's of clinical, but they're not actually practicing.
No.
And the amount of diagnosis when I went to see a psychiatrist.
How many labels have you collected?
I've collected almost the whole diagnosis.
Yeah,
book. Like I was actually the living cycle.
You were the living, walking DSM-5?
Pretty much, yeah. And, I waited quite a few months and I had a really great psychiatrist and, he was like, this is post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
I would not expect anything different. And it's not going to be, for some people it's a little bit quicker, but for my length of trauma, it wasn't going to be a 1 year or a 3 month. This was going to be years of therapy.
Cumulative trauma. It was complex PTSD almost, yeah.
Pretty much. And, my triggers was the New South Wales child protection system. Yeah. In fact, they even knew it to the extent that they were calling it the mental thing and deliberately self-sabotaging anything good that I had going because they were the trauma and didn't want to be accountable. And like you said, it's that joy. You got to quickly, you get scared of someone else taking it from you. And I think, this is why a lot of people go out there and self-harm. And, when we look at the rates of, people in poverty or, people that are in jail or in these mental health wards or, and unfortunately committing suicide, it's because they don't want anyone else, to take that success or, their savings or having a career or even a qualification, something that, they've got up and studied for or worked really hard for. It's like, well, why when they're going to take it away from me anyway? They've taken everything else away. So why should I be entitled, to that? And, again, that's another form of abuse.
Of abuse, exactly.
And that's something that I've had to work on is that I'm entitled to do that stuff without them taking it away from me. And that's still something that I'm working on. And that's a lot to do with my overactive nervous system where I actually, and my low self-esteem that I'm still working on to this day, almost a year and a half into EMDR therapy, and we're still working on this one particular area that I'm probably going to be working on for another year, if not longer, deliberately around that kind of particular area.
And can I just say how awesome it is to be able to have this conversation and you talk about this so openly, because I think people reaching out for help, it can be so hard because it's very stigmatized. So, when you're talking about this type of thing, you can't be shot down in flames for it. And I feel that the system do that. And I think, particularly with your situation with rehab, Glen invited me to an NA meeting and I learnt so much about myself in that meeting. I felt guilty actually for being there because I haven't ever used a drug in my life. But when I thought about their message around addiction, my addiction is this stuff, and it's really unhealthy for me. But in terms of what you learnt from that program, what's been the most beneficial thing for you?
I think self-evaluating. Learning to not to control the controllables, that I can't control everything. I think that's one of the most powerful things for me. You know, that that I was a sick person that needed to be made well, not a bad person that needed to be made good. I think that was an epiphany for me. You know, I have a problem with the over-medicated society, especially with young people. They tried to put me on medication for hyperactivity disorder as a kid, and they were literally trying to fucking put them into my mouth, and I refused to do it. My mother had been giving me pills my whole life, sleeping pills, you know. So when they started to offer to give me medications, my memory of medications was I don't like how I feel. And one time I did take it, I was raped. So I'm not going to take your medications. But I think that there's too many children who are misdiagnosed. Like you, I've been diagnosed with the alphabet every fucking letter. You know,
sadly, it happens to majority of people that are known to child protection or, you know, in the scene that they are the high school bully or they're bullies in high school. The teachers will go, well, they're narcissistic. And I think, you know, we really need to, over another podcast, if we can really unpack, you know, these traumas, you know, we have to understand that we can never excuse abuse at all. No. You know, and working trauma-informed, but you need to hold people to account. Yep. You can't use your childhood to abuse someone else. That's not okay. No. But I think we need to unpack, you know, what's narcissism and what's a bully you're trying to be heard. Yep. Obviously, you know, we still need to be trauma-informed. We need to still hold them to account. But we really need to, you know, stop misdiagnosing, mislabeling, and really, you know, changing that stigma. Especially for victims. And I actually spoke on a podcast about snapping that stigma. You know, people in out home care should not be bullied. People that are known to authorities should not be bullied. We don't actually know. And authorities do go out there and deliberately target parents.
They do.
And then there's also cases where they're on notice and doing nothing. And, you know, it's a bit of a catch-22. There's always need for a child protection system. Yep. And I'm, you know, living experience that, you know, there needs to be one. Individuals need to be held to account. We need to, you know, start seeing charges for these, you know, caseworkers and managers that are actually accessories and, you know, seeing these cases and acknowledging, you know, child abuse is happening or leaving them there because it's actually accessories.
Exactly.
And I think there has been a lot of changes from when Glen grew up, but certainly not enough to keep a child safe and keep the child at the centre of the work.
Can I just go back to the medication thing for a second? Because I think it's fucking important and I think it's a form of laziness, and let me tell you why. I think that a child, let's look at the timeline, right? A child goes through all this abuse, systemic abuse, sexual abuse, whatever kind of abuse that is. The system removes them. The child presents as naughty, presents as hyperactive. They're not looking at the cause, right? They're thinking, what's the best way to sedate or to quiet or stop or cease this behaviour? Say, oh, if we give them this medication, they'll behave this way, as opposed to actually addressing what the fuck is going on with this child where they're acting out, speaking out, doing those kind of behaviours.
What are they trying to communicate to us?
What are they trying to communicate? And what you're doing is by giving them those medications, you're actually shutting down their ability to fucking communicate.
Thank you.
It is fucking crazy.
And they do it because they don't want the child to disclose, so it actually makes their job.
Well, in part, I believe that, but I also believe it's a form of laziness. It's like the parent that hands the kid the iPod and says, here, kid, I watched this all fucking day. You know, it's the same fucking thing as giving someone medication and, like, let's not treat the root cause. Let's just treat the symptom. The symptom is he's misbehaving. The actual cause is he's been abused. But if we're not addressing the cause, we're addressing the symptom. It's like addiction. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. Addiction is the symptom to something much deeper.
Can we just say addiction is not, you know, just drugs or just alcohol. You know, there's pornography, there's sex addictions.
Absolutely.
You know, there's spending addictions, there's addiction to self-harming. And
I struggle with food.
You know, binge eating, you know, addiction is also self-sabotaging. So when you actually have something good and you're so used to it, like you said, you know, survival, you're addicted to, you know, you will deliberately put yourself at risk as an addiction because that's all you're used to, that you actually, it takes years to unwind that, you know, the nervous system, the brain, and how that's learnt to operate. People spend years and, you know, talking about that. Mental health treatment is expensive, not always accessible.
Very hard.
You know, wait lists are long. You know, people like myself are still fighting for funding back, money back. You know, people don't always have this stuff access
so
to
imagine
it.
if children in the system, and I think about I don't talk about my children a lot and I do that deliberately, but, you know, certain children that I may know or may have had wraparound therapeutic supports. I'm talking a regular GP that they've seen pretty much their entire lifespan, that's fortunate, but, you know, paediatrician, psychiatrist if required, OT, speech, psychology, and OT can be mental health OT specific too. You know, I'm sorry, but if children need that, well, then that's exactly what they should have. And it's really, I don't understand why they don't have it. Like I've got current matters at the moment where DCJ are deliberately obliterating NDIS plans. Why don't children have NDIS plans that are in the system? I'll never know. Why do we have teenagers that are in their mid-teens that have been in care their whole life that cannot read, cannot write, cannot do up zips? I mean, come on, but they don't have a therapist that's seen it. But in the documentation, it will state, yep, they're being seen by a whole health team. Well, no, they're not.
NDIS is a great idea and concept, but like many things that are funded like that, they don't filter down to where the fuck they need to go. You know, they often reach the people at the top and they don't actually filter down to where they need to go. Now, there are some incredible people doing NDIS work. Yeah. They're doing incredible work with him and doing. There's
also a lack of training, a lack of trauma informed. And, you know, it's so quick to get a job. And again, you know, it's not really hard to look at. You know, we're seeing people that are, you know, able, you know, they've got friends at the top and they can run their business and, you know, generating up to 600,000 sometimes even think.
Minister, like this is Minister Kate Washington. For those of you that haven't seen, we do have a petition online at the moment. It's in the Legislative Council's site, I suppose, space at the moment. I'll drop the link to the petition in the comments here. It would be really, really helpful if you can sign it, because what we're effectively trying to do is have the minister and that DCJ executive line stood down in order for a full inquiry to be able to occur, because whilst that line of people are currently in there, it's never going to happen. Yeah. The truth won't be out. Look, this minister's been completely anti-independent oversight body for a long time. And I think if we look at what's happened to the former children's guardian, which I think that's a whole other podcast, which I really want to do that. I might get you to interview me for that one. But, you know, I mean, she changed legislation to be able to remove him from his role, because effectively he was looking into things and they didn't like it.
Well, they talk about accountability too. Another thing that's a frustration for me is the sentencing. As you know, I've actually had 4 men convicted. One of them was convicted for abusing 20 children. He got 18 months for every offence to run fucking concurrent, which means that he done 18 months. My second abuser got 18 months. My third abuser got 2 years, 8 months. And then the final one got 10 years because he was sentenced under the new laws. But I mean, that's insane to me. Like, that is fucking bizarre.
It's nuts.
You know, like, what is more precious than a fucking child?
And you do more for a traffic offence, to be honest. Like, my ex-husband was a prison officer and he used to say, you know, women that had come in on their first offence, depending on what, you know, terrible road accidents might have been, you know, going on at the time, that they do more for that than what somebody would for child abuse. It's insane.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane.
Can I ask you a question? If you could narrow your whole story down into one word of feeling, what would it be?
Injustice.
I like that.
Injustice from people that I grew up with, teachers, friends, parents, you know, police officers to an element, because I had some wonderful police officers that really tried. But again, New South Wales Police were negligent in my case. So were Jert, because they were actually aware and detectives were aware. Again, this is where, you know, it gets very political, where they were aware, they had a lot of powers, they could have, you know, put them in jail. Yeah. But again, how do they remove someone when that's a child protection issue and they're reporting it? But again, that's when Jert comes in and there are, you know, detectives that are involved. So it's a very complex case. And even, you know, DCJ. So again, injustice is all I can say. Yeah.
What about you, Glenn? What's your word?
Well, injustice definitely would be one, but I think hurt. I just feel totally fucking hurt. I keep looking back at my own story, and I'm sure you feel this too, and I'm thinking there are so many times where my story could have stopped, where there's a crossroad, where literally it could have stopped, but it doesn't. People are just, nobody's fucking covering, you know, everybody's covering each other's ass. They're so worried about losing position or power or money or whatever the fuck they're losing. Yep. They're forgetting the human factor, the lives in here. You know, I have seen, you know, I've been to more funerals than you can imagine for children under the age of 18, most raised on the streets. The other frustration that I think that needs to be spoken about, whether now or another pod, is the systems. Most of these kids who are raised by docs, end up into institutions, absolutely, which is what happened for me. And my only crime, I was in and out of boys' homes my whole fucking life. And you know what my crime was? Running away from home. Mm-hmm. That's all I did. I didn't break any laws, steal any cars, hit anybody. I did fucking nothing. I just kept running away from being sexually abused or physically abused. I was fucking done. Yep. And what do? They put you into an institution that is equally violent, equally abusive, It doesn't make sense to me, man. The system really needs to reevaluate. And in the old days, we were so fucking far right.
Yeah.
It's not funny. Now we're so fucking far left. We don't know what's right. It's fucking insane.
So Paul O'Reilly is the Deputy Secretary for System Reform, and Stuart Alsher is sort of in charge of dealing with the complaints that are coming through. Glenn, if you have anything to say to Paul O'Reilly and Stuart Malcher, who are in charge of that, $1.2 billion reform budget, what would your message be to those?
Again, I'd say reach out to people with lived experience, probably more so for them than either, because the system, we need a system, right? We need a system, right? But we need a system to be right. One of our problems in our country is we lean towards punitive as opposed to rehabilitation. Mm-hmm. So my advice on that would be, let's stop fucking trying to penalise and let's start looking at rehabilitation. Yep. You know what I mean? And, you go through anger management, NA courses, fucking school certificates, all these sorts of things through your time, as opposed to going into the law of the jungle where you learn nothing but anger and violence. Yeah. We can make huge inroads if we move away from punitive and move towards rehabilitation.
Particularly if you're talking about family preservation with families that are really struggling. Like, I'm really sorry if you don't have robust, intensive therapeutic family preservation. If that hasn't been attempted, well then, what else have you got to say? Then it's lawful trafficking of children.
Yeah.
I mean, again, touching on that, there are services out there that will deliberately self-sabotage and have their own biases. Right. And, there are a lot of NGOs that pocket of, picking, especially if, a parent is a victim of, child sexual abuse or
DV,
anything like that. They pocket on them and just throw them into a statistic, even if it's not them, will not collaborate with any support and deliberately self-sabotage to pocket that funding. And then, that poor parent and child end up losing, they have a ruptured relationship. That child then goes on, to be forcibly adopted or left in care for longer than necessarily because of these therapeutic supports that are pocketing. And when parents in, the community speak up, they're dismissed and silenced by the child protection system who are allowing it. It's another form of abuse, really.
Exactly. So if you had a message for Kate Washington, the minister, today, particularly given what's happening to you both of your compensation is actually all on her watch right now. So, Sarah, what have you got to say to Kate?
I actually have quite a long message. Don't apologise because it's forced.
Yeah.
Actually genuinely mean it. You're actually going to get a lot more respect from the victim, from the public, from people. It actually, you will go to bed at night feeling a lot more happier if you actually got up there and said, I'm going to take a day of my, parliament duties and out of my office, and I'm actually going to go meet this individual or this young person that, I might not have been the minister for, but I'm actually going to go meet them and say sorry and ask them how I can help, what supports they need. Can I make a referral? Can I offer them, even, many kids when they're 18, they don't even get their happy birthday from the minister. And for a lot of kids, that actually, and sorry for my language, fucking means a lot to a lot of young people to actually have a minister get up and say, happy 18th birthday.
Yep.
I would say to her, do it because you actually want to. If you're a minister for children, you actually want to work with children. Yep. I remember when Brad Hazard was a minister and I went to one of his programs and he was so happy to see children. Yep. He was actually the person that referred me on to TAFE, New South Wales, to get my diploma of youth work. That's the type of stuff that you want to see a minister doing. They want to, make, fundraising activities and get engaged and actually, go around. And if there's a mistake, you actually get up there and you say sorry. That would be the best part of your job.
Changed behaviour after the sorry, right? I mean, I've got ministerial apologies last year, only about a year ago. And, I think one of the lines was something, we should have worked with your families, unique talents or something like that. Look at where we are now. They're still behaving in the same way. And I think, on the letters for the birthday, when children leave care, they get a letter from the minister. I don't know if you've got yours, but there are currently a lot of children at the moment that have a letter from leaving care that is signed off by a convicted sex offender, Gareth Ward. And I don't believe that they've actually done anything to rectify that. I know it was a question for budget estimates for someone to ask. I don't think it got asked, but that's these aren't just little oversights. That's huge. Like how would those young people feel knowing that they've got a registered sex offender, that signed off their leaving care letter? That's disgusting.
I mean, if you go into Parliament, if you're going in to be a minister, no matter if it is, for children and families, it doesn't matter what it's for, whether it's energy, whether it's corrections, you go in there to leave a legacy, to make people feel seen, heard, and do the best you can. You don't go in there to sweep things under the carpet and everything. Be that minister that creates a change, that you leave a legacy for generations to come by to look up to you. Even if everyone else in Parliament House frowns upon you, you still know that you're leaving a legacy that many people are going to actually respect you for.
Exactly. Look, I mean, they absolutely hate me for what I'm doing right now. And I've had caseworkers contact me and say, oh, my God, keep going. It's actually making a difference. People are talking about it. No one's ever gone as hard as this as you. And, I think, like, what have we got to lose? Like, I mean, I know for us we've pretty much lost everything anyway. But at the end of the day, if we can be – like, if we're scared – and I've said this multiple times, caseworkers say, oh, I can't report this. I'm really scared. I'm going to lose my job. And I'm like, if you're scared, imagine how scared those children are. Like, we were the children and fine, I'm wounded healing, whatever. I'm talking from the trauma here. At the end of the day, we were the children that needed a voice and those people let us down. Well, we know better. And so if we're not doing better, well then, I mean, I know I can't sleep at night if I'm not doing it. So at the end of the day, Minister Washington, you know what, you've got a choice. And at the end of the day, I think people like ourselves, we're not going away. And I wear that Person B label proudly because it's the speaking up that got me that label.
Feel so fucking frustrated. My whole life I've been through, since 1996, Woodrow Commission, another Woodrow Commission, 4 separate fucking trials, in and out of police stations, reliving my trauma over and over and over and over. Then to finally get to a place of something that where I'm starting to fucking get my life together, then all of a sudden this compensation stuff comes in and they're like, oh, but they're so worried about fucking technicalities, and they're forgetting that at the end of this is a 58-year-old human who has spent a lifetime being fucked over by the system. There needs to be a time where they say, you know what, enough. We need to sit down and just sit in a room, fuck the lawyers, and just say, Glen, we're sorry, and this is our offer to you. And like you say, I need more than money. I need someone to take accountability.
And I think as well, just touching on that, an individual should be entitled to treatment. We have victim services, but you've got to be a victim. If you're a victim of a systemic failure, the child protection system needs to be liable and needs to guarantee that they're going to pay lifetime therapy for that individual of their own choice, not a clinician of their choice that will suit their story or match their story. It needs to be up to the person. Rapport and trust is incredibly important. And I think if they said to you, Glen, we're so sorry what had happened to you. What would you like us to do? Would you like a lifetime of treatment that you never have to pay for? We'll pay for the rest of your mental health treatment. That would mean more than having to spend years fighting for compensation, or like me having it, locked in a safe where you're essentially fighting them, and even being told that you have to pay for perpetrators' costs to victim services, and still fighting years later to have my compensation.
I believe I could have done anything. I honestly do. I'm intelligent, and I know I'm intelligent. I am talented. I have so many different talents, and I believe I could have excelled at something.
And you're so caring. Like, look what you're doing now in the community, the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, even that, setting up that business and getting all that going, and got people all over the country running around doing that stuff. But my point to that is that they're losing the human factor in all this, and they need to come back. Like, at the moment, lawyers are being unfairly enriched. And I mean, we're talking billions and billions of dollars through the redress scheme alone.
Absolutely.
Right? And I would hazard a guess and say 80% of those fucking claims are fucking fictitious. To the real survivors that are falling through the cracks, it is so hurtful to watch as other people say to me, hey, bro, I just got $1 million. I'm like, but you were never abused. Well, they don't know that.
Well, and people are currently being prosecuted for fraud now, which is great. So if you've done the wrong thing with victim services, like the police are onto you.
I hope they get them, because to me, to you, it's a fucking insult.
Exactly.
Because what that does is it says that because of all of these fuckwits that have done it before, now when they come to a genuine survivor who's genuinely been fucked over by the system, they're like, or. And so they're so fucking cautious and they lowball you. And it's like, you don't understand, lowballing me hurt. It actually hurt me really deeply, because I was thought, it's one of the most documented stories in this fucking country. I've been on, there's not many people that don't know my story. And yet here I'm the only person after fucking nearly 30 years of fighting these fuckers uncompensated. And then they offer me, like, as you know, that they lowball me. Which fucking hurt me as well.
Oh, I'm glad.
They lowballed me as well. And they want me to pay over 6 figures to victim services and left my money in a bank safe that I can't touch because they want to pay perpetrators cost.
Yeah.
for a crime that I didn't ask. I didn't ask as a a little girl to be sexually abused.
No, it's true.
I didn't ask to be left there. I didn't ask to be failed. I made multiple disclosures. My safe people that I told were sounding the alarm. Even to safe friends. 4 safe friends were
No one listened.
Saying to their parents, saying, hello, the last incident, this does not make sense. Something is suspicious. She's not the same. We need to do something, sounding the alarm. Sarah trusts me. She's telling me this, but no one's even listening to them.
It's crazy. Look, I just wanted to thank you both so much for coming on today. I know that we've talked about some really deep and probably very difficult things for people to listen to, but I just wanted to say you are two of the most bravest people that I've had the honour of being around. And if there was one thing that you could say to a caseworker, child protection worker, minister, just in a sentence, if you could just wrap it up in one sentence, what would your message be today?
My message will be, if you've made a mistake, hold yourself to account. If you've left a young person to be abused, then take responsibility. Hand in your resignation. Go down to the police station. You've committed an offence. Go seek the help. Go do the programs. Everyone needs to be held to account. Child abuse is child abuse, no matter what level you are at authority. And stop abusing those with lived experience and sabotaging. Yeah. And, stop putting the blame onto them if you've done wrong. Yeah. Take accountability.
That's awesome, accountability. Awesome. What about you, Glen?
Mine would be simple. It's when we're in an office and we're watching things on a computer, it's easy to move things around. But we forget that those things we're moving around are people. Yeah. They're children. Children are fucking vulnerable, man. And for you to have to go through what you just said in relation to your compensation, it's like you haven't been through enough, right? And they just keep adding more on the plate and they don't stop re-traumatizing people. And I think that with children, we need to, as much as possible, keep the family dynamics together. Yeah. I think that if we can start training mums and dads and say, rather than coming in and saying, you're done this wrong, we're taking your kids, and this punitive approach and saying, you know what, guys, hey, you're not really getting it here, but we'd really love to help you to be the best parent you can be so your child has the best experience, and so, again, move away from punitive and move towards education.
Education, exactly.
And I think that's the key. I really do to all of this.
Yeah. And I think we need to educate caseworkers from a lived experience. We need to start having workshops. We need to start being, the change for the system by
everyone's interested in maybe some of us having a bit of an event. What do you think?
Let's start a consultant firm. Lived experience consultant.
I love it.
It's just started right in this office right now.
Look, we could yarn on all day about this. Thank you so much, everyone. Give Glen a follow. I don't think you're on socials yet, but
yes,
you're on LinkedIn. You're in LinkedIn. I'll drop all of the handles in the comments, and don't forget, sign the petition because you do have the opportunity to be the voice and to help.
And I have a petition too.
Oh yes, Glen does.
So mine's
around yours in there too. Bail laws.
Bail laws, and in our country at the moment, right? Just want to finish on this because it's important.
Yep.
If you're a VO, which is deemed a violent offender, if I was to rob a bank, punch them in the face, right? I cannot get bail. You have to get Supreme Court bail, which means you're kept in custody until Supreme Courts happen. If you abuse a child, instantly bail. They're not deemed a VO. Now, what is more violent than abusing a fucking child?
Exactly.
A 3-year-old little girl? Like, fuck me. In the way the laws are, they would...
In fact, it wasn't just abusing. I was actually left in Westmead Children's Hospital with vaginal damaging and discharged with the perpetrators from doctors, nurses, police, child sexual abuse and child protection. So, and it happens to this day. It's the most disgusting thing, and that's why I talk about my story. That's why I sit on so many committees, boards. That's why I've gone on to study my law degree, write my book. And I'd speak so openly and do public speaking because it should not have happened, and it continues to happen. And until we start speaking out, creating that attention to bring awareness, to bring the science, to create that change and to filter that change and hold ourselves and other people to account, nothing changes.
So and let's see how long it takes for them to try and get this episode removed.
Injustice raises warriors.
Exactly.
People either fold or they fucking stand up and fight.
Exactly.
Stood up and fight.
Okay. Thank you so much, you two. And fist pump because we're not really cuddles, are we? No. All right, over and out, everyone, and we'll see you again next time.